3 days before my brother stood on a stage in Washington to be honored as the pride of the Bennett family, my father looked across a dinner table and said I had never given him a single reason to be proud. He didn't shout when he said it. That was the part I remember most. He simply adjusted his cufflinks, glanced at my brother Preston, then looked back at me as if he were discussing a disappointing stock report instead of his youngest daughter. "Maya," he said, "some people are built to carry a family name forward. Some people are built to stay out of the way." No one at the table corrected him. Not my mother. Not my aunts. Not the cousins who had spent years smiling politely while treating me like a quiet mistake. Preston only lowered his eyes for half a second, not out of shame, but because he already knew he had won a competition I had never agreed to enter. Looking back now, I understand that dinner was not the beginning of my story. It was only the moment I finally stopped trying to be seen by people who had trained themselves not to look. My name is Maya Bennett. I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, in a house where reputation mattered more than tenderness and silence was often mistaken for weakness. The Bennett name meant something in our part of the city. My grandfather had built a shipping business. My father expanded it into logistics and private contracting, and my older brother Preston was raised from birth to inherit all of it. There were photographs of him in my father's office before he could even spell his own name. Preston with a miniature briefcase. Preston standing beside a company truck. Preston shaking hands with donors at charity luncheons. Preston smiling under chandeliers while adults told him he looked like a future senator. I was in some family photographs too, usually at the edge, usually half hidden behind someone taller. When people asked about me, my father always used the same words. "Maya is quiet." He said it kindly enough that strangers thought it was affection. It wasn't. In our house, quiet meant difficult. Quiet meant unimpressive. Quiet meant she will not help us shine. I learned that early. Preston was 6 years older than me, handsome in the easy way that made adults forgive his arrogance before he had finished speaking. He had my father's smile, my mother's charm, and the strange ability to turn every room into an audience. I had neither. I watched rooms before I entered them. I listened more than I spoke. I remembered details people forgot they had revealed. When a glass broke in the kitchen, I noticed who flinched. When my parents argued behind closed doors, I could tell by the rhythm of their footsteps who had won. When Preston lied, which he did often, I could hear the tiny pause before he made the lie beautiful. None of these things were considered talents in the Bennett house. Talents were public. Talents looked good in photographs. Talents made donors clap and neighbors whisper, "That boy is going places." I was not going places, according to my father. I was simply there. My mother, Caroline Bennett, was softer than my father but not stronger. She loved peace more than truth. Whenever my father dismissed me, she would give me a small apologetic smile, the kind that said, "Please don't make this harder." For years I mistook that smile for love. Maybe it was love, just a fragile kind, the kind that never crossed a room to defend you. The only person who ever did was my grandmother, Evelyn Shaw. She was my mother's mother, a retired legal clerk with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a way of making silence feel like shelter instead of punishment. She lived in a small blue house near the marsh, far from the polished Bennett estate, and every summer afternoon I escaped there. Grandma Evelyn never asked me why I was so quiet. She never told me to smile more. She never compared me to Preston. She simply handed me books, taught me how to make tea, and let me sit beside her on the porch while the cicadas screamed from the trees. "You notice things," she told me once when I was 11. I shrugged because I didn't know whether that was good. She looked over her glasses and said, "Don't let people convince you that loudness is the same as strength." I carried that sentence for years like a match in my pocket. At home, Preston collected trophies. Debate team, student council, junior business awards, charity youth ambassador, every certificate framed and hung in the hallway. I collected questions. Why did my father's voice change when he spoke to employees? Why did my mother pretend not to hear certain jokes at dinner parties? Why did Preston become cruelest when he felt most insecure? When I was 14, I found him in the garage after he had backed my father's car into a brick column. He was pale, shaking, terrified of what our father would say. I could have walked away. Instead, I helped him clean the paint off the bumper, showed him where the dent would be less visible in the evening light, and told him to admit it before someone else did. He stared at me like I had offered him a weapon. "Why would I do that?" he asked. I remember thinking, because it's true. But truth had never been the Bennett family language. Preston blamed a delivery driver. My father believed him. The driver was fired by morning. I said nothing because I was 14 and had not yet learned the cost of silence. But Grandma Evelyn noticed something in me that weekend. I must have looked different because she set down her teacup and asked, "What did you see?" Not what happened. What did you see? So I told her. All of it. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Maya, one day your gift will either become a burden or a calling. Choose carefully." I didn't understand then. Years later, I would. By the time I reached high school, everyone had accepted the family story. Preston was the heir. I was the strange daughter. Teachers called me disciplined. Coaches called me focused. Classmates called me intense. My father called me hard to connect with. At Preston's graduation party, 200 people filled our backyard beneath white tents and gold lights. My father gave a speech about legacy, ambition, and the rare privilege of raising a son who understood greatness. I stood near the drink table holding a tray because the caterers were short-staffed, and my mother had whispered, "Could you please help, sweetheart?" When my father finished speaking, everyone applauded. Preston hugged him for the cameras. Then one of my father's business partners looked at me and said, "And what about you, Maya? Planning to join the family empire too?" Before I could answer, my father laughed softly. "Maya prefers the background." The guests chuckled. I smiled because that was what Bennett daughters were trained to do when publicly reduced to decoration. Later that night, Grandma Evelyn found me behind the garden wall. I wasn't crying. I rarely cried where anyone could find me. She sat beside me anyway. For a while we listened to the party music fading across the lawn. Then she said, "Backgrounds hold the whole picture together." I looked at her. She smiled. "They just don't beg for credit." That was Evelyn. She could take a wound and wrap it in meaning without pretending it didn't hurt. When college came, Preston went to Georgetown with my father's proud announcement printed in the local business journal. I chose criminal justice at a state university. My father frowned when I told him. "That sounds limiting," he said. What he meant was unimpressive. Preston called it government-adjacent mediocrity, and laughed as if the phrase were clever. Grandma Evelyn sent me a card with $20 tucked inside, and one sentence written in her careful handwriting, "Learn the difference between power and authority." I taped that card above my desk. During those years, I came home less often, not because I hated my family. Hate requires a kind of heat I didn't have. I was tired of being measured by standards designed for someone else. Tired of dinners where Preston's internships became family celebrations and my academic awards became afterthoughts. Tired of hearing my father say, "Maya is doing her own little thing," as if my life were a hobby. But I always visited Grandma Evelyn. She had begun to move slower by then. Her hands trembled slightly when she poured tea, and sometimes she forgot small things. Names of neighbors, where she had placed her glasses, whether she had paid the electric bill. But her mind remained sharp where it mattered. During my senior year, I told her I was thinking about applying to the FBI after graduation. I expected questions, maybe concern. Instead, she looked at me as if she had been waiting for me to arrive at that sentence my whole life. "That makes sense," she said. "Does it? You were never interested in winning rooms, Maya. You were interested in understanding them." I laughed because no one had ever described me so accurately. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't become hard just because people failed to be gentle with you." I promised. I meant it, I still do. The last Bennett family dinner before everything changed happened in December, during Preston's first major public success. He had launched a private equity initiative connected to veterans' housing, and the newspapers loved him. My father invited relatives, donors, and 2 city officials to celebrate at the house. I almost didn't go, but my mother called 3 times and said Grandma Evelyn wanted to see everyone together. That was enough to bring me home. Evelyn sat near the fireplace in a navy shawl, smaller than she used to be but still watching everything. Preston arrived late, making sure everyone noticed. My father raised a toast to him before dessert. "To my son," he said, voice thick with pride. "The future of this family." Glasses lifted. People smiled. I lifted mine too because bitterness had never looked good on anyone. Then my Aunt Marjorie, who always drank enough wine to become honest in the cruelest way, tilted her head at me. "And Maya, dear, are you still doing that law enforcement idea?" Conversation softened. That was how people listened when they expected to be entertained. I said, I've submitted my application. Preston smirked. To the FBI, right? Yes. A cousin laughed under his breath. My father set down his glass. Maya has always been drawn to institutions. He made the word sound like a diagnosis. Some people need structure because they don't naturally lead. Grandma Evelyn's eyes moved to him. Careful, Richard. The room stilled. My father smiled, but the warning irritated him. I'm only being realistic. Then he turned to me, and in front of everyone, delivered the sentence I would remember for the rest of my life. You are not Preston. You don't have his instincts, his presence, or his future. Don't confuse discipline with destiny. No one breathed. My mother stared at her plate. Preston looked away, pretending discomfort while enjoying every second. I felt something inside me go very still. Not break. Not burn. Just still. I nodded once, placed my napkin on the table and said, "Excuse me." I walked out before my voice could betray me. In the hallway, I heard chairs shift behind me, then Grandma Evelyn's cane tapping against the floor. She found me in the library, standing beneath shelves of books no one in that house actually read. For the first time in my life, her face looked tired in a way that frightened me. "Maya," she said softly. "Listen to me." I turned. She took my hands in hers. Her fingers were cold. "There will come a day when the truth enters a room before you do. When that day comes, don't bow your head to make small people comfortable." My throat tightened. "Grandma, I'm tired." "I know. I don't want to prove anything to them anymore." Her eyes softened. "Good. Then you're finally ready to become who you are." 2 weeks later, Grandma Evelyn died in her sleep. At her funeral, Preston gave a polished speech about family values. My father shook hands beside the casket like he was hosting a reception. My mother cried quietly into a lace handkerchief. I stood at the back of the church, unable to move toward the front because the only person who had ever truly seen me was lying in a wooden box beneath white lilies. After the burial, while the family gathered at my parents' house, a lawyer I didn't recognize approached me near the porch. He was elderly, with kind eyes and a brown envelope tucked under one arm. "Maya Bennett?" he asked. "Yes." He glanced toward the house, then lowered his voice. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this when the family finally made you feel alone in a crowded room." My heart stopped. He handed me the envelope. My name was written across the front in Grandma Evelyn's handwriting. I waited until I was in my car to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. 8 words. Just 8. But they changed the direction of my life. When they refuse to see you, serve anyway. I still remember the smell of rain on the day my grandmother died. Not because it was raining heavily. It wasn't. It was one of those gray South Carolina afternoons when the clouds hang low over the marshes and the air feels heavier than usual, as though the world itself is carrying something it doesn't know how to put down. The call came just after 6 in the morning. I was halfway through a cup of coffee when my phone rang. Seeing my mother's name on the screen at that hour immediately made my stomach tighten. My mother never called before sunrise unless something was wrong. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the phone. Deep down, I think part of me already knew. When I finally answered, I heard her crying before she spoke. "Maya," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's Grandma." Everything inside me went still. "What happened?" There was a pause filled only by quiet sobbing. Then she said the words I had been dreading for months. "She passed away during the night." I don't remember dropping into the chair behind me, but suddenly I was sitting. The coffee on the table continued steaming. Cars continued moving outside my apartment window. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The world kept going exactly as it had 1 minute earlier, and that felt wrong. Completely wrong. Because the one person who had always believed in me was gone. I wish I could say I cried immediately. I didn't. I simply sat there staring at nothing while my mother continued talking. Funeral arrangements, family arriving, travel plans, practical details. Human beings have a remarkable ability to discuss logistics while their hearts are breaking. By the time she finished speaking, I had written down 3 addresses, 2 phone numbers, and a service schedule. Then I hung up and sat alone in silence for nearly an hour. The hardest part wasn't accepting that Evelyn was gone. The hardest part was realizing there would never be another phone call, never another summer afternoon on her porch, never another handwritten note tucked inside a birthday card, never another person who looked at me and saw something valuable without asking me to prove it first. I drove to Charleston that same afternoon. The closer I got to home, the heavier everything felt. My father's house appeared exactly as I remembered it. Large. Impressive. Immaculate. The kind of place designed to communicate success before anyone stepped inside. Cars already lined the driveway. Relatives moved in and out carrying food trays and flower arrangements. People hugged each other. People whispered. People performed grief in the socially acceptable ways families often do. When I entered the house, my mother rushed toward me and wrapped her arms around me. She looked exhausted. "I'm glad you came," she said. I almost laughed because where else would I be? This was Evelyn, the woman who had helped raise me, the woman who had saved me in ways nobody else ever understood. My father appeared a few moments later. He hugged me briefly, awkwardly, then immediately began discussing funeral schedules and guest counts. It wasn't cruelty, it was simply who he was. Emotions made him uncomfortable. Control made him feel safe. Preston arrived later that evening. He walked into the house surrounded by conversation, the way some people walk through sunlight. Relatives immediately gathered around him. Questions, compliments, handshakes, stories about his latest business success. I watched from across the room and felt something I hadn't expected. Not jealousy, not anger, just distance. We had grown up in the same house, yet somehow existed in entirely different worlds. During dinner, relatives shared memories of Evelyn. Some stories were genuine. Some felt rehearsed. Then Preston stood and delivered a polished speech about family legacy. Everyone applauded. Several people wiped away tears. My father looked proud. I sat quietly and thought about the hundreds of afternoons Evelyn spent helping struggling neighbors fill out legal paperwork. The countless rides she gave people who couldn't afford transportation, the meals she delivered when families were struggling. None of those things appeared in Preston's speech, because none of those things looked impressive from a stage. The funeral took place 2 days later beneath clear skies. The church overflowed with people: teachers, veterans, single mothers, retired workers, former co-workers, neighbors, people from every corner of Evelyn's life. Looking around, I realized something that should not have surprised me. My grandmother had quietly impacted more lives than anyone in the Bennett family. She simply never talked about it. After the service, while relatives gathered outside, I stood alone beside the cemetery. The crowd slowly dispersed until only a handful of people remained. That was when an elderly attorney approached me carrying a brown envelope. "Maya Bennett?" he asked. "Yes," he smiled gently. "Your grandmother instructed me to give this to you personally." My heart immediately tightened. I accepted the envelope with shaking hands. Across the front, written in familiar handwriting, was my name. Nothing else. Just Maya. I waited until I was alone in my car before opening it. Inside was a single folded page. I unfolded it carefully. The message was short. Typical Evelyn. She never wasted words. "When they refuse to see you, serve anyway." I stared at those 8 words until the letters blurred. Then I noticed something else. A second page. My hands shook harder as I unfolded it. This one contained several paragraphs. The first sentence nearly stole my breath. "By the time you read this, I suspect you will feel very alone." Tears finally came. Not polite tears. Not controlled tears. Real grief. Because even from beyond the grave, she understood exactly what I was feeling. The letter continued. She wrote about character. About purpose. About how some people spend their lives chasing recognition while others quietly become indispensable. She wrote that I had spent too many years measuring myself against standards created by people who never truly understood me. Then came the sentence that changed my life. "You were never meant to inherit the Bennett name. You were meant to honor it." I read that line over and over. Something shifted inside me. For years I had wanted approval. My father's approval. My family's approval. Proof that I mattered. But sitting alone in that car, holding Evelyn's final letter, I suddenly realized something. I was chasing validation from people who had already decided who I was. Nothing I accomplished would ever fully change their perception. Not because I lacked value, because their vision was limited. That evening, after everyone returned to my parents' house, I quietly packed my bag. My mother found me near the front door. "You're leaving already?" she asked softly. I nodded. "I have to get back." She looked disappointed. "Your father was hoping we could spend some family time together." Family time. The phrase almost felt ironic. I glanced across the room. My father and Preston were discussing investment opportunities with 2 relatives. Neither had noticed I was leaving. "Maybe another time," I said. My mother hugged me. She held on longer than usual. "I love you, Maya. I love you too." Then I walked outside. As I reached my car, I looked back at the house one final time. For years, I had believed that earning my place there was one of the most important goals in my life. Standing beneath the fading evening sky, I finally understood that it wasn't. For the first time, I wasn't leaving because I felt rejected. I was leaving because I had somewhere else to go. Somewhere bigger. Somewhere that needed the gifts Evelyn had always seen in me. 2 weeks later, I submitted the final paperwork for the FBI. 1 month later, the acceptance call arrived. And when I heard the words, "Welcome to the Bureau," I remembered the last letter my grandmother ever wrote. What I didn't know then was that her death was not the end of her influence on my life. It was the beginning. Because years later, in a crowded room filled with some of the most powerful people in America, a secret connected to Evelyn would return and change everything I thought I knew about my family. The day I left for Quantico, my father stood in the driveway with his hands in his pockets and looked at me as if he were watching someone make a respectable but unfortunate mistake. My mother had hugged me twice already, smoothing the collar of my coat the way she used to when I was a child, though neither of us said what we both understood. She was proud, but she was afraid to be too proud in front of him. Preston did not come outside. He had a conference call, according to my mother, though his car was parked by the garage, and I could see him through the upstairs window with a coffee mug in his hand. That was our family in one image. My mother trying to soften the moment, my father measuring it, my brother observing from a safe distance, and me standing beside my packed car with my grandmother's letter folded inside my wallet. "The Bureau is not an easy place," my father said finally. I nodded. "I know." He studied me for another second. "Government work can be limiting." There it was again, the polite Bennett version of disappointment. Limiting. Small. Safe. Unimpressive. I could almost hear Preston saying it later over dinner, probably with a smile. Maya chose a badge over a future, but for the first time, the words did not land where they used to. They did not bruise. They simply passed through me. Evelyn had given me something my family never understood. She had given me a mirror that did not belong to them. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it depends on what someone is trying to serve." My father's expression changed slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. He heard Evelyn in that sentence. I think that bothered him. My mother's eyes filled, and she hugged me one more time. "Call when you arrive," she whispered. "I will." Then I got into the car, backed out of the driveway, and watched the Bennett house shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the oak trees. I expected to feel sadness. Instead, I felt space. For years, I had mistaken distance from my family for loneliness. That morning, driving north toward Virginia, I realized distance could also feel like oxygen. Quantico was not glamorous. That surprised some people, but it comforted me. It was not designed to impress. It was designed to strip away illusion. The buildings, the training fields, the classrooms, the ranges, the dormitories, everything carried the same message. Image would not save you here. Name would not save you. Charm would not save you. You either learned, adapted, endured, and improved, or you did not belong. I loved it before I was willing to admit I loved it. The first weeks were exhausting in a way I had never experienced. Physical training started before sunrise. Classroom instruction filled the day. Scenario exercises exposed every hesitation. Firearms training demanded precision. Legal instruction demanded discipline. Behavioral analysis demanded patience. Report writing demanded clarity. There were days when my body hurt so badly that climbing into bed felt like an operation, and there were nights when I lay awake replaying mistakes no one else probably remembered. But beneath the exhaustion, something in me steadied. For the first time in my life, the things my family had dismissed as defects began to reveal themselves as tools. Quiet was not weakness when you were interviewing a frightened witness. It was space. Observation was not strangeness when a suspect changed one word in the third telling of a story. It was evidence. Discipline was not dullness when fatigue made everyone careless. It was protection. I did not become someone new at Quantico. I simply entered a place where the person I had always been finally made sense. At first, some classmates underestimated me. That was familiar enough to feel almost comfortable. They mistook my silence for uncertainty, my calm for passivity, my refusal to compete loudly for lack of ambition. I let them. There is useful information in being underestimated. People reveal more when they do not think you matter. During one investigative simulation, our class was divided into teams and handed a complicated case file involving a missing accountant, suspicious wire transfers, 3 conflicting witness statements, and a timeline that seemed impossible. Most of my team focused on the money because money was the loudest clue. I focused on a janitor's statement no one else cared about. He had mentioned that the office lights were already on when he arrived, though the security log suggested the accountant had entered later. It was a small contradiction, the kind people overlook because it does not feel dramatic. But small contradictions are often where truth breathes. I asked for the building access records, compared them against a maintenance schedule, then noticed that one executive had used a service entrance 12 minutes before the official timeline began. When the exercise ended, our instructors revealed the correct solution. My team had found it. One of them, a former detective from Chicago, turned to me and said, half laughing, "Bennett, do you ever miss anything?" I wanted to tell him yes. I had missed how lonely I was for years. I had missed how much I wanted my father's approval. I had missed how deeply Preston's indifference had shaped me. Instead, I only smiled and said, "Everyone misses something." An instructor named Daniel Reyes noticed me after that. Reyes was a former Marine and one of those men who rarely raised his voice because he had learned long ago that authority did not need volume. He watched trainees the way Evelyn used to watch rooms, not looking for performance, but for truth. One evening, after a difficult interview exercise, he found me alone in the hallway reviewing my notes. "You ask fewer questions than most," he said. "I try to ask the ones that matter. And who taught you that?" I thought of Evelyn's porch, her teacups, her sharp eyes behind thin glasses. "My grandmother." Reyes nodded as if that answered more than I had said. "Hold on to that. In this job, people will try to make you harder than you need to be." His words stayed with me because they sounded like an echo of her final warning. Don't become hard just because people failed to be gentle with you. That became one of the quiet battles of my training. The Bureau taught me how to pursue dangerous people, how to read deception, how to enter a room where something terrible had happened and still function, how to keep my hands steady when fear wanted them to shake. But Evelyn had taught me why any of it mattered. Without that, skill could become arrogance. Power could become performance. Authority could become the very thing I hated. I called my mother every Sunday. She always asked if I was eating enough, sleeping enough, making friends. My father came onto the line occasionally, usually to ask practical questions. How long was training? What office might I be assigned to? Was there room for advancement? Preston called once, 2 months in, while he was waiting for a flight. "So," he said, "are you officially one of those people who kicks down doors now?" I could hear airport announcements behind him. "Not exactly," he laughed. "Well, try not to become too intense. You already had a head start." Years earlier, that comment might have followed me for days. This time, I looked out at the dark Virginia sky beyond my dorm window and felt almost nothing. Not because I no longer loved him. I did. That was the complicated part. I loved all of them. I simply stopped giving them unrestricted access to the most fragile parts of me. Graduation came on a bright morning with rows of chairs, polished shoes, pressed suits, proud families, and cameras lifted at every angle. My mother came. My father came. Preston did not. There was a board meeting he could not move. My mother apologized 3 times on his behalf, though I had not asked her to. My father shook my hand after the ceremony and said, "You look professional." It was not the speech a daughter dreams of hearing, but I had learned to accept truth in whatever size people were capable of offering it. Later, while my parents spoke with another family, Special Agent Reyes approached me. "Bennett," he said, "remember something. The job will reward your discipline. Don't let it consume your humanity." I nodded. "Yes, sir." He glanced toward my parents, then back at me. "And don't spend your life waiting for people to understand the cost of what you carry. Most won't." That sentence landed deeper than he knew. A few weeks later, I received my first assignment. The work was not cinematic. It was reports, interviews, surveillance, late nights, early mornings, court documents, dead ends, and the slow discipline of building cases piece by piece. I discovered quickly that justice often moved less like lightning and more like water wearing down stone, but I believed in it. That belief carried me through the first hard years. It carried me through cases involving financial fraud, missing persons, interstate threats, and families whose lives had been cracked open by violence or greed. I did not talk about most of it at home. My father would not have known what to do with the details. My mother would have worried. Preston would have made some joke about federal paperwork. So I gave them simple versions. Work is busy. I'm fine. Nothing new. In truth, everything was new. I was learning how much darkness ordinary people could hide behind normal doors, but I was also learning how much courage could live in people the world ignored. The elderly neighbor who remembered a license plate, the cashier who noticed a child looked frightened, the exhausted mother who gave a statement even though her voice shook the whole time. I began to understand that service was not one grand act. It was 1,000 small decisions to keep showing up. Then, in my 6th year with the Bureau, I was assigned to a joint operation in Arizona that would later be buried under sealed reports and classified summaries. At the time, I thought it was just another case involving a trafficking network moving children across state lines. We had a location outside Tucson, a narrow window, and very little room for error. The night was dry and cold, the desert sky scattered with stars sharp enough to look unreal. I remember standing outside a darkened warehouse, listening through my earpiece as teams moved into position, feeling my breathing slow the way it always did before danger became real. Inside that building was a little girl with no name in our file, only an approximate age and a grainy photo taken from a gas station camera. I did not know who she was. I did not know who her father was. I did not know that saving her would one day bring some of the most powerful people in America into the same room as my family. All I knew was that a child was waiting in the dark, and for once, being unseen was exactly what made me dangerous. When people imagine success in federal law enforcement, they usually imagine the moment someone flashes a badge, makes an arrest, or appears on the evening news. The truth is far less dramatic and far more demanding. Most success happens quietly, hidden inside thousands of hours nobody sees. It happens in surveillance vans parked for 14 hours on empty streets. It happens beneath fluorescent lights while reviewing documents most people would never have the patience to read. It happens in interview rooms where a single overlooked detail can determine whether a dangerous person walks free or spends the next 20 years in prison. During my first years with the Bureau, I learned that justice rarely arrives with applause. More often, it arrives disguised as persistence. After the operation in Arizona, life did not suddenly transform. There were no headlines carrying my name, no ceremonies, no public recognition. The case itself generated attention, but the agents involved remained largely invisible, which was exactly how most of us preferred it. The rescued children were reunited with families, the trafficking network was dismantled, and the Bureau moved on to the next threat. That was the rhythm of the work. You learned very quickly that if your motivation depended on recognition, you would not last long. What surprised me most was how natural that felt. I had spent my entire life existing outside the spotlight. The difference now was that my efforts actually mattered. For the first time, being unseen no longer felt like rejection. It felt like purpose. Over the next several years, my responsibilities expanded. The Bureau transferred me through different assignments, each one more demanding than the last. Financial crimes led to interstate investigations. Interstate investigations led to organized criminal networks. Organized criminal networks eventually led to task forces involving multiple agencies. Every assignment taught me something new. Every case revealed another layer of human behavior. Some people broke laws because they were desperate, others because they were greedy, some because they believed they would never be caught. The motivations changed, the patterns rarely did. One thing remained constant throughout all of it. The qualities that had made me an outsider in my family continued to become advantages in my career. I listened carefully. I noticed inconsistencies. I paid attention when people dismissed details as unimportant. Again and again, those habits produced results. Supervisors began requesting me for complex investigations. Senior agents trusted my judgment. Prosecutors asked for my analysis during case preparation. None of it happened overnight. It happened slowly, one successful assignment at a time, until one day I realized something I had never imagined as a teenager sitting silently at the Bennett family dinner table. People respected me, not because of my last name, not because of who my father was, not because I knew influential people. They respected me because I had earned their trust. The strange part was that my family knew almost none of this. My mother understood a little more than the others because she asked questions. She genuinely wanted to know how I was doing. We spoke nearly every Sunday. Sometimes she asked about work. More often she asked whether I was sleeping enough, eating properly, or spending too much time alone. Mothers rarely stop being mothers. My father remained largely uninterested in the details. To him, success was something visible. It appeared on magazine covers, financial statements, and conference stages. Federal investigations happened behind closed doors. Therefore, in his mind, they occupied a lower category of importance. Preston was even worse. By then, his career had exploded. Business publications featured him regularly. He appeared on podcasts, panels, and charity boards. Investors sought his opinion. Journalists requested interviews. Every holiday gathering seemed to include another story about one of his achievements. My father practically glowed whenever Preston entered a room. The dynamic had not changed. The only difference was that it no longer hurt the way it once had. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped measuring my value against their approval. I still loved them. I simply stopped depending on them. One Christmas, nearly 8 years after joining the bureau, I returned to Charleston for the holidays. Preston arrived carrying expensive gifts and several stories about a recent appearance on a national business program. Relatives gathered around him exactly as they always had. At dinner, one of my cousins asked what I had been doing lately. Before I could answer, Preston laughed and said, "Classified. Probably." The table chuckled. My father smiled. I smiled too because technically he was correct. Much of my work was confidential. The conversation immediately returned to Preston's latest investment project. Years earlier, that would have bothered me. That night, I found myself studying the room with almost detached curiosity. Everyone still occupied the same roles. My father still celebrated visibility. Preston still thrived on admiration. My mother still tried to keep everyone comfortable. The only person who had truly changed was me. After dinner, I walked onto the back porch alone. The winter air carried the scent of salt from the harbor. For a few minutes, I simply stood there looking at the darkness. Then I heard footsteps behind me. My mother appeared carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to me. "You seem happy," she said. I thought about the answer. "I think I am." She smiled softly. "Your grandmother would have liked that." The mention of Evelyn immediately tightened something in my chest. Even after all those years, I still missed her. Some losses never fully leave us. They simply become part of the architecture of who we are. My mother leaned against the railing beside me. "Your father doesn't always understand you." I laughed quietly. "That's one way to describe it." She smiled. "For what it's worth, I think he's proud of you." I looked toward the lights glowing through the windows of the house. "Then he has a strange way of showing it." She did not argue. A few months later, my career entered a new phase. The Bureau selected me for a specialized task force focused on child exploitation and interstate trafficking operations. The assignment carried enormous responsibility. It also carried enormous emotional weight. Some investigations stay with you longer than others. Cases involving children have a way of reaching places inside you that ordinary training cannot protect. The work required patience, precision, and resilience. It also required trust. The people leading the task force were among the most experienced agents in the country. Their confidence in me represented one of the highest professional compliments I had ever received. I accepted the assignment without hesitation. During the following years, our team successfully dismantled several major networks operating across multiple states. Children were recovered, families reunited, predators prosecuted. Most of those victories never appeared in public. The world rarely learns the names of the people responsible for preventing tragedies. That is the nature of the job. Yet each success reinforced something Evelyn taught me long ago. Service matters whether anyone notices or not. Then, one autumn morning, I received a call from Assistant Director Warren Hayes. His office rarely contacted field agents directly unless something significant was happening. I assumed the conversation would involve another operation. Instead, he asked me to travel to Washington. "How long?" I asked. "A few hours." His tone revealed almost nothing. "What's this about?" There was a pause. "I'd rather discuss that in person." That answer immediately captured my attention. When people at that level refuse to explain something over the phone, there is usually a reason. 2 days later, I sat across from him inside a secure conference room at FBI headquarters. Hayes reviewed several files before finally sliding a folder across the table toward me. "Do you recognize that name?" he asked. I looked down. The first page contained information about a high-profile philanthropic foundation preparing to host a national leadership gala in Washington, D.C. The event would include senators, governors, military leaders, business executives, and federal officials. Nothing unusual there. Then my eyes reached the list of keynote speakers. One name immediately stood out. Preston Bennett, my brother. I looked up. Why am I reading this? Hayes folded his hands. Because someone specifically requested your attendance. That made even less sense. Who? For the first time, the assistant director smiled. That, he said, is the interesting part. Then he opened another folder. Inside was a letter bearing the seal of a United States senator whose family name was recognizable in every state in America. The moment I saw it, a memory flashed through my mind. A cold desert night. A warehouse outside Tucson. A frightened little girl wrapped in a blanket. Hayes watched my expression carefully. I see you remember. Suddenly my pulse accelerated, because for the first time in years, I realized the operation in Arizona might not be finished with me after all. And whatever was about to happen next had the potential to change far more than my career. If someone had told me 10 years earlier that my name would one day appear on the same invitation list as senators, military commanders, cabinet officials, and some of the most influential people in the country, I would have laughed and assumed they had mistaken me for someone else. Not because I lacked confidence. Because I had spent most of my life being treated as someone who existed just outside the center of every important story. The daughter nobody quite understood. The sister who never fit the Bennett family image. The quiet one. The background character. Yet as I sat alone in my apartment in Northern Virginia staring at the documents Assistant Director Hayes had placed in front of me, I could not ignore the fact that something unusual was happening. The invitation was real. The request was real. And most importantly, the person requesting my presence was not someone who made casual requests. Senator Jonathan Whitmore was one of the most recognized public figures in America. His family had spent generations in public service. His influence reached across political parties, federal agencies, and national institutions. People at his level did not personally request the attendance of mid-career FBI agents they barely knew, unless there was a reason. The answer arrived 2 days later during a private meeting inside a secure office at FBI headquarters. Senator Whitmore entered with the calm confidence of a man who had spent decades walking through rooms where everyone knew his name. Yet what struck me most was not his authority. It was his expression. There was gratitude there. Genuine gratitude. The kind that cannot be manufactured for cameras. After introductions, he sat across from me and placed a photograph on the table. The moment I saw it, I felt the air leave my lungs. It showed a young girl smiling beside a horse at what appeared to be a summer camp. She could not have been older than 10. I recognized her immediately. Not from the photograph. From Arizona. From the warehouse. From the frightened child wrapped in a blanket on a cold desert night. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then the senator smiled softly. Her name is Claire. I looked at the photograph again. She's your daughter. He nodded. My youngest. The room seemed strangely quiet after that. I remembered carrying her to an ambulance. I remembered promising her she was safe. I remembered the way she refused to let go of my hand until medical personnel arrived. At the time, she was simply a child who needed help. I never knew who her family was. I never asked. The senator folded his hands. You saved her life. I immediately shook my head. A lot of people were involved in that operation. He smiled. That sounds exactly like what everyone told me you would say. I laughed despite myself. The truth was simple. No operation succeeds because of one person. Yet I could see from his expression that this conversation had nothing to do with operational details. This was personal. Claire talks about you, he said quietly. More than you probably realize. I looked down at the photograph again. Something tightened in my chest. She was very brave. The senator nodded. You gave her that chance. What happened next surprised me. Instead of discussing the Arizona case, he began talking about a leadership gala scheduled for the following month in Washington. The event would bring together leaders from government, law enforcement, the military, and the private sector. Publicly, the purpose was philanthropy and leadership recognition. Privately, there would be several special honors presented. Then he looked directly at me. I want you there. I frowned. Why? His smile widened slightly. Because some stories deserve to be told. Immediately, I felt uncomfortable. Attention had never interested me. Recognition felt even stranger. Senator Whitmore seemed to notice. You are already trying to think of reasons to decline. I smiled. Maybe. He laughed. That confirms what I've heard. Then his expression grew serious. Agent Bennett, There are young people attending this event who believe leadership means standing in front of cameras. They need to see another version. I did not know how to respond. The conversation ended shortly afterward, but the invitation remained. A week later, official confirmation arrived. I was expected to attend. The timing could not have been more ironic. At almost the exact same moment, Preston's name began appearing in promotional material connected to the same gala. He had recently completed a highly visible national housing initiative and was being honored as one of the country's most influential young business leaders. Newspapers loved the story. Television programs featured interviews. Industry publications praised his vision. Every few days, my mother sent me another article. "Your brother is everywhere," she said during one phone call. There was pride in her voice. There always was when she talked about Preston. I understood it. He had worked hard. He had achieved remarkable success. The problem was not his accomplishments. The problem was what those accomplishments had taught my family to value. Visibility had become their definition of importance. 3 weeks before the gala, my father called unexpectedly. We spoke only occasionally, so I immediately assumed something was wrong. Instead, he sounded excited. "Did your mother tell you about Preston?" I smiled. "The award? It's a major event." His enthusiasm was unmistakable. Cabinet officials, military leaders, CEOs, national media. I listened quietly, then he said something that felt strangely familiar. "This is the kind of room that changes lives." I looked out my apartment window toward the evening traffic below. Years earlier, I would have agreed. Years earlier, I believed important rooms created important people. Now I understood the reverse was usually true. Important people create important rooms. "Sounds like a big opportunity," I said. "It is." Then came the question I should have expected. "Will you be able to watch the broadcast?" For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. The broadcast? The gala. I almost laughed. He did not know. None of them knew. "Maybe," I replied carefully. "Work schedule permitting." My father seemed satisfied with that answer. The conversation continued for another few minutes before ending. Afterward, I sat alone on my couch thinking about how strange life could be. In a few weeks, my family would travel to Washington convinced Preston was the central figure of the event. They had no idea I would be there too. The official invitation package arrived shortly afterward. It included security credentials, event schedules, transportation details, and accommodation information. Near the bottom of one document was a note indicating that several attendees would be recognized during a private segment before the public ceremony. My name appeared on that list. Seeing it in writing made everything feel more real. Yet even then, I assumed the recognition would be modest. A handshake, a photograph, perhaps a few remarks. Nothing more. I certainly did not imagine it would become the most important day of my life. Meanwhile, the Bennett family entered full celebration mode. My mother called constantly with updates about travel plans. My father discussed seating arrangements. Relatives posted congratulatory messages online. Preston appeared on multiple television programs promoting leadership initiatives. The closer the gala approached, the more attention he received. During one interview, he spoke about legacy, family values, and the responsibility of using influence wisely. I remember watching that segment from my apartment and feeling a strange mixture of affection and sadness. Because despite everything, Preston genuinely believed most of what he was saying. The problem was not hypocrisy. The problem was blindness. He had spent so many years being admired that he rarely noticed people standing outside the spotlight. The week before the event, I received another phone call from Senator Whitmore. This one lasted less than 3 minutes. Near the end, he said something that immediately captured my attention. "There's one more thing you should know." I waited. His tone changed slightly. "Claire insisted on attending." I smiled. "I'm glad she's doing well." There was a brief silence. Then he said, "She asked whether the lady from Arizona would be there." My chest tightened unexpectedly. I looked toward the framed photograph of Evelyn sitting on my bookshelf. "Tell her yes." The senator laughed softly. "I already did." After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. Because for the first time, I began to suspect this event was not about awards at all. It was about stories, about people whose paths had crossed years earlier without realizing the consequences. 2 days before the gala, I arrived at work and found a sealed envelope waiting on my desk. There was no return address, no explanation. Inside was a single printed page. The message was brief. Extremely brief. Just one sentence. Yet the moment I read it, every instinct I possessed told me something significant was about to happen. The sentence read, "Your attendance has become a matter of national interest." There was no signature. No explanation. Nothing else. And for the first time since Arizona, I felt the unmistakable sensation that someone, somewhere, had been waiting a very long time for me to walk into that room. The morning of the gala began so quietly that part of me still finds it difficult to believe it became the day my family finally saw me. I woke before sunrise in my apartment in Northern Virginia, made coffee, answered 2 work emails, and stood for a long time beside the window watching the city slowly brighten beyond the glass. Nothing about the morning felt historic. Nothing warned me that by nightfall, my father would look at me differently for the first time in my life. I dressed carefully, not because I cared about impressing anyone, but because federal training teaches you to respect the room you are entering. The invitation said formal attire, so I wore a simple black dress beneath a dark coat and carried my credentials in a small clutch. Before leaving, I opened my wallet and touched the folded letter from Evelyn. The paper had softened at the creases after years of being carried from city to city, case to case, hotel room to hotel room. When they refuse to see you, serve anyway. I read those words silently, then slipped the letter back into place. At that moment, I still believed the evening would be about Preston, about awards, about cameras, about the Bennett family standing proudly around the son they had always chosen. I did not yet understand that the truth had already entered the room before I did. Washington was glittering by the time I arrived at the venue. Black vehicles lined the entrance. Security moved guests through checkpoints with quiet precision. Reporters stood behind velvet ropes, naming officials as they arrived. Inside, the ballroom looked almost unreal. All polished floors, tall flags, gold light, white tablecloths, and glass chandeliers throwing reflections across the ceiling. Senators spoke with generals. Judges shook hands with CEOs. Cabinet officials moved through the crowd like people accustomed to being watched. Years ago, a room like that might have made me feel small. That night, it simply made me observant. Power has a sound. It is not always loud. Sometimes it is the soft murmur of people who know decisions bend around them. I checked in, accepted my program, and stepped aside. That was when I saw my family. My father stood near the front of the reception area in a charcoal suit, looking younger than he had in years because pride has a way of straightening a man's posture. My mother stood beside him, beautiful and nervous, smoothing the edge of her sleeve. Preston was surrounded by guests, smiling easily, accepting congratulations, already the center of a circle that seemed to form naturally around him. For a few seconds, I watched them without moving. None of them knew I was there. The thought should have hurt. Instead, it settled inside me like an old truth I had finally stopped fighting. I took a seat near the side of the ballroom, close enough to see the stage, far enough to remain unnoticed. The program began with music, introductions, and speeches about leadership, philanthropy, innovation, and public responsibility. Preston's award came midway through the evening. A short video played on the large screen behind the stage, showing him at construction sites, boardrooms, charity events, and television interviews. My father leaned forward as though every frame belonged to him too. When Preston walked onto the stage, the applause was generous. He gave a polished speech, thoughtful, confident, impressive in every public way. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about using influence to lift others. He spoke about family values. And when he said those words, my mother wiped her eyes. I clapped because his accomplishments were real. That was the complicated thing about Preston. He was not a monster. He was talented, disciplined, ambitious, and generous when generosity cost him nothing emotionally. He simply had spent his whole life being taught that attention and value were the same thing. When his speech ended, the room stood briefly for him. My father looked as if he might cry. For a moment, everything appeared to be exactly what my family expected. Preston in the light, the Bennetts applauded, the name preserved. Then Senator Whitmore walked onto the stage, and the atmosphere changed so quickly I felt it before I understood it. The conversation stopped first. Then the cameras shifted. Then people who had been half listening suddenly sat straighter. Senator Whitmore did not begin with ceremony. He began with silence. He placed both hands on the podium and looked across the ballroom for several long seconds. "Tonight," he said, We have spoken a great deal about leadership." His voice was calm, but something beneath it carried weight. "We have honored achievement, influence, generosity, and success. All of those things matter. But there is another kind of leadership that often goes unrecognized because it does not ask to be seen." I felt my pulse begin to slow, the way it always did before danger or truth. The senator continued. "Several years ago, my family lived through the worst night of our lives. My youngest daughter was taken by a trafficking network operating across state lines. For hours, we did not know if she was alive. For hours, every phone call felt like it might destroy us." The ballroom became completely still. I saw Preston's smile fade. I saw my father turn toward the stage with the alert confusion of someone realizing the event had moved beyond his script. Senator Whitmore described Arizona without naming classified details. The warehouse outside Tucson, the joint operation, the children found inside, the narrow window between rescue and tragedy. His voice cracked only once, when he spoke of a little girl refusing to let go of the hand of the agent who carried her out. My chest tightened because I remembered that hand. Small fingers gripping mine through a thermal blanket, a trembling voice asking if the bad men were gone. I had not known her name then. I had only known she needed someone calm enough to make the world feel survivable for another minute. Senator Whitmore paused and looked toward the side of the stage. A young woman stepped forward. She was taller now, poised, wearing a pale blue dress, her hair pinned back, her eyes shining with tears she was trying not to shed. "Claire." For a moment, I did not see the ballroom. I saw the desert. I saw the warehouse door. I saw a child blinking under emergency lights. The senator placed an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "This is Claire," he said. "She is here tonight because a federal agent most of you have never heard of chose service over recognition, courage over comfort, and duty over fear." The room did not move. Even the photographers seemed hesitant to break the silence. Then he said my name. "Special Agent Maya Bennett." The sound of it traveled through the ballroom like a door opening. Hundreds of faces turned. I stood slowly. My mother saw me first. Her hand flew to her mouth. My father's expression emptied, then filled with something I had never seen there before. Not pride yet, shock. Preston turned in his chair, looked directly at me, and for the first time in my life, he had no performance ready. I walked to the stage because there was nothing else to do. Each step felt longer than it was. When I reached the senator, he shook my hand with both of his, not like a politician greeting a guest, but like a father greeting the person who had returned his child to him. Claire stepped forward. "Do you remember me?" she whispered. I smiled, and this time I could not stop my own tears. "Of course I do." She hugged me then, in front of senators and generals and cameras and my entire family. The ballroom remained silent for one breath, then another. Claire pulled back and turned to the microphone. Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. She talked about the birthdays she had lived to celebrate, the friends she had made, the college applications she had just submitted, the nightmares that slowly became less frequent, the life she almost lost. Then she looked at me and said, "You didn't just save me that night. You gave me every day after it." I had faced armed suspects with steadier hands than I had in that moment. Senator Whitmore returned to the microphone. "Character," he said, "is what a person does when no applause is guaranteed. Integrity is what remains when status is removed, and greatness is not found in being admired. It is found in how many lives are safer, stronger, and freer because you chose to serve." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then an older Marine general near the front stood. He began applauding. A federal judge stood beside him, then another table, then another. Within moments, the entire ballroom rose. The applause was not polite, it was not ceremonial. It came like a wave, full and human and overwhelming. I looked out and saw my father standing slowly, his face pale, his eyes fixed on me. My mother was crying openly. Preston remained seated for half a second longer than everyone else, not out of disrespect, but because I think his body had forgotten how to move. Then he stood too. The applause lasted almost a full minute. I wanted Evelyn there so badly that for one irrational second, I turned my head as if she might be standing somewhere near the back, smiling that small, knowing smile of hers. She wasn't, and yet, somehow, she was everywhere. After the ceremony, people approached me for nearly an hour. Officials, agents, military officers, strangers with tears in their eyes. I said the same thing again and again because it was the only truth I knew how to offer. I was part of a team. I was doing my job. Claire was the brave one. Most people smiled, but few seemed convinced. Eventually, I escaped to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The air was cold, and the lights of Washington stretched beneath the night like scattered stars. I had been standing there for several minutes when the door opened behind me. I did not turn immediately. I already knew it was my father. He stepped beside me and rested both hands on the railing. For a long time, he said nothing. That was unusual for him. My father had always known how to fill silence with authority. This silence seemed bigger than he was. Finally, he spoke. I did not know. I looked at him. His eyes were wet. I had never seen my father cry. Not at weddings, not at funerals, not even when Evelyn died. I know, I said softly. He shook his head. No, that is not an excuse. I did not know because I never asked. I never looked closely enough. The words landed gently and painfully at the same time. He turned toward me fully. I spent years thinking your brother was the one carrying our family forward, and tonight I realized you were carrying something much heavier. I did not answer because I was afraid that if I spoke too quickly, all the years between us would collapse at once. The balcony door opened again. Preston stepped out. For once. He looked younger than me. Uncertain, unprepared. Maya, he said. Just my name. No joke. No cleverness. No performance. I waited. He swallowed hard. I used to think you were quiet because you had nothing to say. His voice broke slightly. Tonight I realized you were quiet because you were carrying things I never bothered to understand. My father looked down. Preston continued. I was jealous of you before I even knew what you had become. That surprised me. Jealous? He gave a sad laugh. You never needed the room the way I did. I hated that. For a moment, none of us spoke. The noise of the gala drifted faintly through the glass behind us, but outside, the night felt separate, almost sacred. I thought about Rachel and Emily from another life. About sisters on a balcony, about how public recognition sometimes matters less than the private truth that follows it. I didn't want to beat you, I said finally. I know that now, Preston whispered. My father wiped his eyes. Can you forgive us? It would have been easy to say yes. It would have made the moment cleaner, softer, more satisfying. But real healing is rarely clean, so I told the truth. I can begin. My mother joined us then, crying before she reached me. And when she wrapped her arms around me, something in me finally loosened. Not all of it, not 20 years of being unseen, but enough. Later that night, after I returned home, I took Evelyn's letter from my wallet and placed it on the table. When they refuse to see you, serve anyway. For years, I thought those words were meant to help me survive being overlooked. Now I understood they were also meant to keep me from becoming bitter, because service had not just changed other people's lives. It had saved mine. It gave me purpose when approval failed. It gave me strength when family wounded me. It gave me a way forward when I could not go back. If there is one thing I hope you take from my story, it is this. Never let the people who fail to recognize your worth convince you that your life has no value. Keep showing up. Keep doing the right thing. Keep serving with integrity even when no one claps, because character has a way of reaching places applause never can. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who feels unseen today. Leave a comment for the person who once believed in you when nobody else did. And if you want more stories about quiet strength, family wounds, second chances, and the kind of courage that changes lives without asking for attention, follow and subscribe. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of the people you love, and remember that sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones who never needed to prove it.